I didn't expect my life to spiral the way it did. I'd always been the kind of person who believed in the stability of family, the idea that blood ties could hold everything together. But what happened in the last few months completely shattered that belief. My name is Jack, and I'm 32 years old, living in a small apartment in the city, far away from the family home I grew up in, the house where I spent most of my life, and where I never imagined things could turn out the way they did. My mom, Jennifer, was everything to me growing up. She worked hard as a teacher, always supportive, always making sure we had everything we needed. There was one thing, though, that I never quite understood. It was the way my dad, Richard, would always seem distant, even when he was home. He wasn't a bad guy, he just had a way of retreating into himself when things got tough, and that was often. Mom never really talked about it. But I could tell something was off. I guess I just chalked it up to normal adult stuff. The kind of stuff that kids aren't supposed to know about, until the day I found out that everything wasn't as perfect as it seemed. You see, I had a younger brother, Ethan, who was 28 at the time, and while we weren't exactly close, we always got along. That was until he started spending more and more time with our dad, and something about that started to rub me the wrong way. Ethan and I hadn't really had any serious issues, but there were things I'd picked up on, little things that made me uncomfortable. I guess I was too wrapped up in my own life to pay much attention. But when I did, it was hard to ignore. I'll never forget the day everything came crashing down. It all started with a casual dinner, one of those family gatherings we'd have every couple of months. Just the four of us, my parents, Ethan, and me. Nothing special, just another evening of awkward silence and polite conversation. I had no idea that night would be the turning point. The night when I found out that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. We were halfway through dinner when Mom's phone rang. Her face went pale as she excused herself to take the call. I didn't think much of it at first, probably work or something. But then I saw Ethan's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He glanced at me, then quickly turned his gaze away, and that's when I knew something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that gut feeling that told me I was about to learn something I wasn't supposed to know. It wasn't until after dinner when things came to light. When we were all gathered in the living room, trying to avoid any awkward conversations, that's when my mom sat us down and said it. She said that she knew what had been going on, and she wasn't going to pretend anymore. I had no idea what she was talking about, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't until she said the words, "Richard has been having an affair," that the world as I knew it started to crumble. My first instinct was disbelief, but as she continued, I could see the hurt in her eyes. This wasn't just some mistake. It was years of deception, years of lying. Ethan and I just stared at each other, both of us completely stunned. How had we missed this? How had we not seen what was happening under our own roof? The more she spoke, the worse it got. She said the affair had been going on for over 2 years, and it wasn't just some fling. This woman, Vanessa, had become part of our lives in a way I never could have imagined. Mom had found out months ago, but she had kept quiet about it, trying to keep things together for the sake of the family. But she couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't live a lie. My dad, Richard, he'd been the one to hide everything. But now the truth was out, and there was no going back. I don't know why I didn't see it sooner. Maybe I just didn't want to. But now that I knew, it felt like my entire childhood had been a lie. But here's the kicker, the real twist that would change everything. As it turned out, Ethan, my own brother, had known about the affair the whole time. He'd known for months and never said a word to me, not a single thing. He had kept it from me, from everyone. I was blindsided, not just by the affair, but by Ethan's betrayal. When I confronted him, he tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, like it didn't matter. But I could see the guilt in his eyes. He had known and had kept quiet. He'd kept this massive secret from me, and for what? I still don't know. All I know is that it felt like a punch to the gut, and I didn't know who I was more angry at, my dad for betraying Mom or Ethan for betraying me. For years, I had trusted him, and now that trust was shattered beyond repair, it was too much to handle, and I couldn't look at either of them the same way again. What made everything worse was that Dad, Richard, didn't even seem to care. He was indifferent to the whole situation. He just kept saying that he was sorry. But I couldn't understand how someone could apologize for something like that and expect everything to just go back to normal. I could barely look at him without feeling disgusted. And Mom, well, she was done. She wasn't going to stay with him any longer. She was finally going to do something about it. She had been stuck in this toxic relationship for so long, but this was the final straw. It was hard to watch her go through that pain, but I respected her for finally standing up for herself. For once, she was putting herself first, and it was about time. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't going to let him get away with it anymore, and I didn't blame her. As for Ethan, well, things were never the same between us again. I tried to reach out, tried to talk about it, but it was pointless. It was like he didn't even care about the mess he'd caused. The betrayal was too deep, and I couldn't get past it. He had sided with Dad, kept his secret, and I couldn't just forgive him for that. Not now, not ever. I don't know where things went wrong, when we went from being brothers to strangers, but that's exactly what we became. It wasn't just the affair that broke us. It was the lies, the betrayal, and the fact that I'd been blind to it all. I never thought I'd be the one telling this story. But here I am, recounting how my family, the one I thought I knew, tore itself apart over lies and secrets, and it all started with that dinner. The days that followed that dinner felt like a blur. I was stuck in this weird limbo, torn between anger, disbelief, and confusion. I couldn't go back to how things were before, but I didn't know what to do with the mess that was now my family. My relationship with my mom and dad had shifted so drastically, I wasn't sure how to even approach them. There was this uncomfortable distance now, this gap between us that wasn't there before. Not like this mom, though. She was different. For the first time in years, she seemed almost free. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I could see it in the way she carried herself, the way her posture was straighter, and the way she smiled when we talked. She was hurt, no doubt, but she wasn't defeated anymore. She was taking control of her own life for the first time in so long, and there was something almost inspiring about it. I wanted to support her, but I also felt like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't know how to help without making it worse. As for Ethan, things went cold fast. We didn't talk for days after that dinner, and when we did, it was awkward. There was no, "Hey, how's it going?" or "Let's hang out." Just this distant, strained conversation about the most basic things. Work, the weather, whatever else we could talk about that didn't involve the elephant in the room. Dad's affair, Ethan's betrayal, everything falling apart. I could tell he was trying to act like nothing had changed, but the truth was, everything had. He had betrayed me, and not in a small way. This wasn't just some harmless secret. This was something that had shattered my trust in a way I couldn't easily fix. I remember one night, a week or so after the whole thing went down, I called him up. I didn't even know what I was hoping to get out of the conversation. Maybe I wanted answers, or maybe I just needed to hear him say something that made sense of all of it. We met up at a bar, neither of us being the kind of guys to make emotional phone calls, so we did it face to face. "Jack," he said when he saw me. "Look, man, I know this is all messed up, but I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know what to do." That was the first time he'd actually tried to explain himself. The words were almost rehearsed, like he'd been practicing them in his head for days. "I get that it's hard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But how could you just sit there and say nothing? How could you not tell me, your brother, what was happening?" I leaned in a little, frustrated. We were supposed to have each other's backs. Always. I thought that was how it worked. But you let Dad do this behind Mom's back, and you didn't even think about telling me. Ethan looked away, his face scrunched in discomfort. "I didn't want to cause more problems, Jack. It wasn't like I was okay with what was happening, but I didn't think it was my place to say anything." "Not your place? What about the fact that Mom was in the dark, that she was getting betrayed right in front of her face? Doesn't that matter?" I snapped, not realizing how loud I was getting until I saw people starting to look our way. Ethan sat back in his chair, his shoulders slumping. "I just didn't want things to fall apart more than they already had. I thought maybe it would blow over, you know?" I sat there in silence for a moment, trying to process it all. "You thought what? That Dad would just stop? That everything would magically fix itself if you did nothing?" Ethan didn't answer, and I realized there was no point in continuing this conversation. I wasn't going to get the kind of apology I wanted. And maybe I wasn't even sure what that would look like anymore. The betrayal wasn't something you could just fix with words. I could tell he felt guilty, but the damage was done. And I wasn't sure how to fix things, or if I even wanted to. That night, I left the bar feeling empty, not even angry, just hollow. I had no idea where Ethan and I stood anymore, but I knew it wasn't the same. The brother I thought I knew, the one I'd been through everything with, was gone. And in his place was someone I didn't recognize. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel for Mom. She was starting over, in a way. It wasn't the start she had wanted, but it was a new beginning nonetheless. The house didn't feel the same after everything came out. There was a different energy, like the whole place was breathing a little easier. I'd always taken it for granted, the home we had growing up. But now it felt like a place that had seen too many secrets buried inside it. Too many lies had been woven into the walls for it to ever feel completely safe again. I did what I could to help Mom with the logistics of it all, but she was stronger than I expected. She wasn't asking for my help, not in the way I thought she would. She wasn't asking for sympathy either. She was just moving forward. In her own way, she was taking control of everything, and I admired her for it, even though it was painful to watch. As for Dad, well, he didn't exactly make things easier. I hadn't spoken to him much since that night, and the few times I did, he seemed to think everything would just go back to normal. He'd apologize, but it was empty, like he was doing it because it was expected. I couldn't even look at him without feeling disgusted. He'd betrayed Mom, sure, but more than that, he'd betrayed the idea of what family should be. Ethan's words were still ringing in my head, though. I didn't think it was my place. What kind of excuse was that? I kept thinking about what I would have done if I had known. I would have told Mom without a doubt. I would have protected her. I would have stood by her. But Ethan didn't. And now there was no going back. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next. Stay angry? Try to fix things with Ethan? Maybe it didn't matter. The whole situation felt like it was slipping out of my control, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the life I thought I knew was gone. All of it, the family ties, the belief that we'd always have each other's backs. It was all gone, and I didn't know how to get it back. A couple of weeks went by, but nothing felt normal. It was like the world around me had changed, but I was stuck, holding on to the same things I couldn't let go of, the anger, the disappointment, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that clouded everything I saw. I kept trying to tell myself I was just processing it, that eventually things would settle down, but they never did. It felt like I was living in this fog, just going through the motions but not really feeling anything at all. Mom and I had a few more conversations after the big blow-up, and slowly, she started telling me more about what she'd gone through. It wasn't just the affair that had hurt her. It was everything that came with it. The lies, the hidden phone calls, the late nights. She didn't get into the details of what happened between her and Dad, but it was clear that she'd been holding on to a lot more than just the secret of his cheating. She'd been trying to protect the family, trying to keep everything intact, even when it was falling apart around her. I couldn't blame her for that. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel like she'd been robbed of something, her own sense of happiness, of security, because she'd been so focused on keeping the peace. When she told me she was thinking of selling the house, I knew she was serious about moving on. It made sense, though. That house held too many memories, too many things that had to be let go of. But I didn't want her to sell it. That house was everything, to me and to her. It was where we had our family dinners, where we had laughs and arguments, where we celebrated birthdays and holidays. It was where I had my first real heartbreak, and where I learned to ride my bike. I didn't want to let it go. Not like this, but I knew I couldn't stop her. That day, after she brought it up, I found myself standing in the yard, staring at the house like I was seeing it for the first time. I looked at the front door, remembering how it always used to open with a welcoming creak. I couldn't picture anyone else walking through it. It felt like a piece of me would vanish if we sold it, like I was losing a part of my past, something that would never come back. But I also understood that maybe it was time for both of us to let go. Mom needed her own space to rebuild, to find herself again. And I couldn't keep clinging to the past just because it was easier than facing the future. The hardest part, though, wasn't the house. It was Ethan. He kept calling, texting, and trying to reach out, but I just couldn't bring myself to answer. Part of me wanted to hear him apologize or at least try to explain himself in a way that made sense. But every time I thought about it, I couldn't shake the anger I felt. I was mad at him for not telling me, mad at him for not standing up when things started going south. And most of all, I was mad at him for making me feel like I was the last person in the world who should have known the truth. It was on one of those nights, about a month after everything had blown up, that I finally picked up his call. I had no idea what I was expecting from him. Maybe a heartfelt apology. Maybe him finally realizing the extent of what he'd done. But what I got was something entirely different. "Jack," Ethan said when I picked up, his voice hesitant. "We need to talk." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. "I know you're mad at me," he continued. "And I get it, I really do, but I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I need you to understand that I never meant to hurt you." I felt the anger flare up again. "You didn't mean to hurt me, Ethan. You kept a huge secret from me. This wasn't just something small. This was everything, our family, our trust. How could you just sit on that and pretend like it didn't matter?" There was a pause on the other end. Then he said, "I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe if I just kept my distance, I wouldn't make it worse." "Distance?" I couldn't help but shout. "You should have been the one to step up, Ethan. You're my brother, and you kept this from me. You didn't think it mattered to me? You didn't think I deserved to know what was happening to our family?" I could hear him sigh on the other end, almost like he was holding back tears. "I messed up, Jack. I know I did. And I'm sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I need you to know that I didn't do it to hurt you. I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix it." I sat there silent, trying to process it. The frustration was still there, but part of me deep down could see that he was hurting too. Not in the same way, of course. He hadn't been blindsided by all of this, but he was struggling with his own guilt. Still, that didn't excuse what he'd done. That didn't make it right. "Ethan," I finally said, my voice quieter, "I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Not yet, but maybe we can start over. Maybe we can figure out what's next, but I'm not going to pretend like everything's fine." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I get it, Jack. I just hope one day you'll be able to forgive me." I didn't have the energy to say anything else, so I just hung up. The call left me feeling drained, exhausted. I didn't know what it was supposed to mean, what kind of closure it gave me, but I couldn't shake the sense that nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan was still my brother, but I wasn't sure where we went from here. The trust had been broken, and I didn't know if it was something that could ever be fully rebuilt. As I put my phone down, I realized how much I'd changed too. I was no longer the person I had been before all this happened. I wasn't the guy who could just sweep things under the rug and move on. I couldn't pretend everything was fine, not when it felt like my whole world had been turned upside down. But maybe, just maybe, I was starting to see that moving forward meant accepting that things would never go back to the way they were. That was the hardest part, to stop living in the past and start figuring out how to make it through the future, even if it wasn't what I'd imagined. Time moved on, but I still felt like I was stuck in the same place. The house, the phone calls, the endless loop of questions I couldn't answer. Nothing felt like it was getting better. I had moments where I thought maybe I could just forget about it all, let go of the anger, and go back to living my life like nothing had changed. But every time I tried, it was like the weight of everything pressed down harder. The lies, the betrayal, it lingered, following me around like a shadow I couldn't escape. Mom had started looking at new places, but every time she found something she liked, it was like something inside her pulled back. She was torn, I could see it. She wanted to move forward, but the memories of the house, of us, of the life we'd all shared were hard to shake. She had to get away though, I could tell. The house wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, and every corner, every room, reminded her of the life she'd tried so hard to build with my dad. I understood, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. Watching her go through that, watching her struggle to let go, was almost harder than anything I'd faced. We spent a lot of time talking, mostly about logistics. where she would move, when the house would go on the market, what needed to be packed up and sold. But those conversations were always wrapped in a heavy silence, as if we were both avoiding the deeper issues. Neither of us wanted to confront the fact that this was more than just about selling a house. This was about letting go of the dream we had both held onto for so long. It was about losing something we'd never get back. And no matter how many boxes we packed, it didn't seem like we were getting any closer to healing. I still hadn't made peace with Ethan. Every time I thought about reaching out, it felt like the same wall of anger slammed down. He'd tried, sure. He'd sent a few texts, left a couple of voicemails, but nothing felt genuine. It was as if he was doing it because he felt like he had to, not because he understood why I was so hurt. I couldn't explain it to him anymore. I tried over and over, but I didn't think he could get it. He didn't see it the way I did. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about family. He was my brother. We were supposed to have each other's backs no matter what. And that line had been crossed in a way that was impossible to come back from. A few weeks after that phone call, I was sitting at my favorite bar, nursing a beer and just trying to clear my head. The place had become my go-to spot when I needed to think. It was quiet, nothing fancy, and I didn't have to talk to anyone if I didn't want to. But that night, as I sat there, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Ethan, standing at the end of the bar, nursing a drink of his own. I hadn't expected to see him, not like this, not in this place. We hadn't talked in a couple of weeks, and seeing him standing there felt like an old wound being reopened. My first instinct was to turn around, pretend I didn't see him, but for some reason, I didn't. I didn't want to face him, but something in me said I had to. I was tired of avoiding it, tired of pretending like everything was okay when it wasn't. I stood up, walked over, and took a seat next to him. Ethan didn't even look up at first, but when he did, I could see it in his eyes. Regret, guilt, all the things he hadn't said to me yet. "Jack," he said, his voice low. "I didn't know you came here." I didn't answer at first. I wasn't sure what to say. I could feel the tension between us, thick as fog, but I knew at that moment that I couldn't avoid this anymore. I had to talk to him, not for him, but for me. "I didn't expect to see you," I said, finally breaking the silence. He nodded, his fingers tapping nervously on his glass. "I get it. I know I messed up, but I really want to make things right. I know you're angry at me, and I understand why. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, Jack. I don't want to lose you." I looked at him for a long time, letting his words sink in. It was hard to listen to because I wasn't sure I believed him. I wasn't sure if I could believe him. But something about hearing him say it out loud, seeing him vulnerable for once, made me feel like there was a chance. Maybe not a perfect chance, but a chance. "I don't know if I can just forgive you, Ethan," I said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever get past what you did, but I'm willing to try if you're willing to do the work." Ethan's face softened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that. But at least we were talking again. At least we were both trying. "I'll do whatever it takes, Jack," he said, his voice steady now. "I'll do anything to fix this. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right away. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know I'm here, and I want us to find a way back to being brothers." I sat back in my seat, trying to digest everything he'd said. The anger was still there, but I could feel it starting to fade, little by little. Maybe I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I could see that he was trying. And maybe that was enough for now. "We'll see," I said, my voice soft. "But it's going to take time, a lot of time." "I get that," Ethan said. "I'll wait, whatever it takes." We sat there in silence for a while after that, neither of us knowing exactly what to say. But for the first time since all this started, I felt like there was a crack in the wall between us. Maybe that crack would lead to healing, maybe it wouldn't. But I knew I couldn't keep holding on to the past forever. I had to let go. I had to move forward, even if it meant taking small steps. When I left the bar that night, I wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Maybe things wouldn't ever be the same, but they didn't have to be. I just needed to figure out how to live in this new reality, one where trust had been broken, but maybe, just maybe, could be rebuilt. The days after that night at the bar felt different. Not exactly better, but less heavy. Ethan and I hadn't spoken much, but things weren't as tense between us anymore. There was no more pretending everything was okay, but there was a strange kind of understanding between us now. A mutual recognition that this was going to take time, and it wasn't going to be easy. But at least we were trying. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just going through the motions, like I was carrying all the hurt alone. Mom had been slowly packing up the house, making the hard choices. The walls were bare now, the empty spaces where pictures used to hang, the echo of footsteps where laughter once filled the rooms. She was more settled in her decision to sell, even if it still hurt her. It was like she was cutting ties with the life she thought she'd had. But I saw a change in her, a spark of independence I hadn't noticed before. She wasn't just moving out of the house, she was moving on in a way I hadn't expected. And even though it hurt me to see it, I also saw how freeing it was for her. It wasn't just the house. She had started looking at other things, new hobbies, new friends, even talking about traveling once she was settled. It was like the weight of Dad's betrayal had been holding her down, but now she was stepping out of it, learning to live for herself again. It made me proud of her, but it also made me realize how much I had to let go too. I couldn't hold on to the past, not the way I had been, not if I wanted to keep moving forward. Then, one evening, Mom came into my apartment with a big envelope in her hand, and I knew right away it wasn't good news. Her face was pale, and there was that look in her eyes, the one that meant something serious was coming. "Jack," she started, sitting down next to me on the couch. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately, and I think it's time." I didn't know what she meant at first, but then she pulled out the envelope and handed it to me. It was a letter, addressed to Dad. "I'm going to file for divorce," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've been holding on to this idea of what our family was supposed to be, but it's not that anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." I took the letter from her, staring at it for a moment, trying to process the words that didn't seem real. Mom was finally taking control, finally making the choice that had been so hard for her, the choice to walk away. I looked at her, not sure what to say. I had seen her in so much pain over the last few months, but now there was a sense of peace in her, a strength I hadn't seen before. "I'm proud of you, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You deserve this. You deserve to be happy." She smiled, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know if I'll ever be completely happy again, Jack, but I can be okay. I can find my own peace, and that's enough." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mom filed for divorce, and things with Dad got even more complicated. He wasn't exactly fighting it. He knew he'd messed up, but there was this coldness between us now. He wasn't apologizing the way he should have been. He wasn't even trying to explain himself. It was like he had given up on us altogether. And maybe in a way, I had given up on him too. I didn't want to hold on to all the anger anymore. It was exhausting, and in the end, it was only hurting me. So I started to let go. I let go of the idea of family being something that had to be perfect. I let go of the belief that everything could be fixed with an apology or a promise. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward. And that was the hardest part. Ethan reached out again, a few weeks after Mom filed. This time his message wasn't full of excuses. It was a simple text. "I'm sorry, Jack. I'll be here when you're ready." I stared at the screen for a while before responding. "I'm not sure when that will be, but maybe we'll get there." It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time, it felt like a step forward. Not toward fixing everything all at once, but toward understanding that some things couldn't be fixed. Some things just had to be accepted. In the end, I think that's what this whole experience taught me, that not everything has a happy ending. And sometimes, things have to break before they can be rebuilt. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the story. It's just a new chapter. One where we decide what we want to take with us, and what we're willing to leave behind. The house sold faster than I expected, and Mom moved into a small apartment closer to the city, not far from me. It wasn't the grand house we'd once dreamed of, but it was hers. And that was enough. We both knew it was time to start fresh, to build our lives on our own terms, without the weight of old expectations hanging over us. As for Dad, well, he stayed in the house. He didn't fight for much else. and I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. I had to accept that he was never going to be the father I wanted him to be. But that was his choice. And I had my own choices to make now. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Ethan and I would ever find our way back to each other the way we once were. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. So I let go. And I moved forward, one step at a time. Maybe that's the hardest thing to do, letting go. But it's also the most freeing. It's the only way to make room for something better. Something real. Story 2. This narrative has a title. When I was pregnant, my sister ejected me and my parents supported her. Hello everyone. I just wanted to let you know about something that's actually happening. Recently, the channel has been a little slower. And to be honest, I worked really hard to uncover these tales so that I could continue to provide you with the greatest material. It would mean the world to me if you found enjoyment in what I do. Assuming you clicked the subscribe button. Your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. According to the original poster, being a single mother isn't easy. But for the past 5 years, my daughter Lily and I have been fighting against the odds. I cheated on her father during my pregnancy and left him before she was even born. That was the last straw. I ejected him. I got back on my feet after filing for child support, which he seldom ever pays. The most logical thing to do following the breakup was to move back home with my parents. I figured, why not accept their offer of assistance? Family members are meant to help one another. It was effective for a time. I felt it was appropriate to help with food and pay their rent. In order for me to work, my mom promised to watch Lily a couple of days a week, but she soon began to renege on that commitment. She would tell me she was too busy to help or leave Lily in front of the TV instead of monitoring her. Even if it wasn't perfect, I could manage to save a little money and Lily was secure. Then, like a wrecking ball, Mia returned into our life. I will always remember coming home from work. Despite being worn out, I'm eager to see Lily. My younger sister was seated on the couch as if she had never left. When I stepped in, she hardly greeted me, her huge pregnant belly resting on her lap and a smug expression on her face. My relationship with Mia has never been the finest. She was always the golden kid growing up. Mia ran around acting like a brat whenever she smashed something, but I was the one who was taught to lead by example. I was always the target of my parents' accusations. They would argue that I should be the larger person if she started a fight. We continued to show preference as adults. It grew worse, if anything. Mia married Ben a few years ago, and the two of them relocated to Germany because of his work. I believe that our relationship may genuinely become better with distance. Out of mind and out of sight. Correct? Apparently not. She was treated like a superstar by my parents, who were often gushing about how pleased they were of her for relocating overseas. The best response I received while balancing work, a newborn, and an absent husband was, well, that's just part of being an adult. It was startling to find Mia back at home, lounging on the couch as though she owned the space. Before I could ask my mom all the questions I wanted to, she came up with the solution. She remarked in a happy tone, as if this were the finest news imaginable. "Oh, Mia's back for good." "For good?" Trying to seem unbiased, I asked. From her place on the couch, Mia, ever the queen of sarcasm, responded, "Yes, we will remain here. This is just simpler for us now that Ben has been sent back to the United States. Do you have an issue with that?" Reality was setting in quickly, but I bit my tongue. Mia was more than a guest. She was going to live there for good. My mother went on. In order to support Mia during her pregnancy and after the baby is born, we decided it would be best for her to remain here, even though Ben has company housing. Assist her? My mother hardly ever came to see me when I was pregnant. She most definitely didn't offer to let me return or provide any kind of significant assistance. My mom couldn't be bothered, so I had to make do on my own by hiring a nanny while working full-time. However, it was an entirely different story for me. By bringing food, fluffing pillows, and pretending to be a fragile princess, my mom was virtually stumbling over herself to make her feel at ease. Despite my best efforts to remain composed, I had to inquire, "What about space? This isn't exactly a large space." Mia shot back before my mom could respond. "Don't stress over it. We'll work things out." She didn't seem to care how it affected me or Lily based on her tone. She now owned this house. My mother dismissed my worries, stating, "Oh, we'll work something out." Don't worry. That night I felt sick to my stomach as I went to bed. The idea that this was going to become a nightmare kept coming to mind. Mia hadn't changed one bit. She was still the same entitled, manipulative person she'd always been. And now she was going to occupy the one remaining area of safety that Lily and I had. The preference become even more obvious over the course of the following several days. My mother attended to all of my needs, preparing her meals, taking care of her errands, and even purchasing pregnant pillows for her. I was fortunate if my mother volunteered to prepare a snack for Lily in the interim. It was enragement rather than annoyance. There was obvious hypocrisy. However, my mother would shrug and respond, "Well, Mia's pregnant. Whenever I attempted to bring it up, right now, she needs extra assistance." My mother wasn't the only one. Normally calmer, my dad suddenly became Mia's strongest ally. For hours, Dad would sit and talk to her about the baby, remembering our childhood, like I didn't even exist. Lily and I seemed to be invisible. Naturally, Mia enjoyed every moment of it. She made mocking remarks about how, despite the fact that I was paying rent, I should be thankful to have a place to live. She takes over the living room, scatters her belongings, and acts as though she is the only person who matters. She even dared to tell me that I should be happy one night. "Your parents are assisting you. Not everyone is as fortunate." Fortunate? Coming from someone who has been given everything in her life, that was rich. I wanted to retaliate, but I knew it would not change anything. My parents weren't going to support me, and Mia wasn't the kind to listen. I began to feel confined. My parents had always owned this house, but suddenly it seemed like Mia, regardless of how much I contributed or how much I paid in rent. Lily and I were obviously second-class citizens. I made an effort to concentrate on my career and being the best mother I could be for Lily, but the stress in the home was overwhelming. In hindsight, I ought to have anticipated the impending storm. It was more than simply a reunion when Mia returned. It was the beginning of a power struggle. Furthermore, I was never going to succeed in my parents' eyes. Things quickly got out of hand and utterly out of control. After just 1 week of her return, Mia already felt like the head of the household. My parents catered to her every need, treating her as though she were made of glass. She yelled commands, wrote notes all over the place, and pretended that by putting up with me, she was helping me. In the meantime, I continued to cook for myself, pay my rent, and care for Lily on my own. At first, there were just faint indications that something was developing. The home seemed packed, and Mia began to protest loudly. Every time I entered the living room, she would let out a loud sigh or say something nasty like, "It's hard to relax with all this chaos around chaos." Although Mia behaved as though my daughter was a cyclone blasting through her valuable area, Lily is the most well-mannered child you can imagine. Naturally, my mother pulled me away. One evening, after Mia had complained about Lily playing with her toys in the living room, she added, "You have to understand, she's pregnant. You may become more sensitive to clutter and loudness due to pregnancy hormones. Everything but her own attitude is sensitive to her," I whispered to myself. My mother gave me a look that told it all, but she didn't say anything. In her view, I was the issue. Mia's grievances soon become demands. "I need the guest room for the nursery," she declared one day. "Keeping everything in the bedroom is too difficult." I was working on Lily's schoolwork at the table when I looked up. "Do you mean my room?" I squinted as I asked. "Yeah," Mia said, as if it were the most apparent thing in the world. "You can relocate to the basement or another location. Please pardon me, this is where I pay my rent. You can't simply evict me from my room." Mia looked to my mom, who was hanging close by, and rolled her eyes. "Tell Mom it's not a big issue. It is only a temporary situation." My mother paused and looked at each of us. She addressed me as though I were a child and said, "Sweetheart, if you just agreed, it would be easy for everyone. You don't need the room as much as Mia does." I had never before understood the extent my parents would go to for Mia. The fact that I had a child to care for, had paid rent, or had lived there longer didn't matter. I was only an annoyance, and Mia's desires came first. I refused to give up my room or allow someone to intimidate me into submitting, but I kept my ground. However, the tension in the family continued to rise, and I began to feel alienated in my own house. Mia made crude remarks about how fortunate I was, or how I should have moved out by now. Mom and Dad were very giving. Despite not saying anything directly, my parents' silence was quite telling. Whose side they were on was obvious. Then one day I realized right away that something was off when I got home from work. My initial impression was of Lily sitting on the front porch looking frightened and holding her teddy rabbit. My boxes and baggage were beside her. I packed up everything I owned and threw it outside. "Mom?" Lily's voice wavered as she spoke. "Why are our belongings out here?" My heart fell. I bent over and gave her a strong embrace. I tried to sound steady as I said, "It's okay, baby. Let's investigate this inside." I opened the door, dragged my belongings after me, and entered. Mia was stretched out on the couch, browsing through her phone as if nothing had occurred. When I first noticed her, my dad was watching TV in his recliner while my mom was in the kitchen. They seemed as though throwing me out was simply another typical day. "What is this?" My voice trembling with rage, I demanded. "Why are my belongings outside?" Mia hardly raised her gaze. She responded nonchalantly. "We needed the space. You were occupying too much space, Dot." My mother turned and used a dish towel to wipe her hands. "You always understood, my love, that this arrangement was temporary." Her tone was annoyingly calm as she said, "Mia craves solitude and tranquility because she is pregnant. You need to move on now. Proceed. This is where I pay my rent. I assist with grocery shopping. Do you believe that throwing Lily and me out in this manner is acceptable?" When my dad finally glanced up from the TV, he stated it was for the best rather than supporting me. "It will come to you." What I was hearing was unbelievable. They weren't only dismissing me. They had no qualms or regrets about what they were doing. Mia, too. She was having a great time. I wanted to shout at the arrogant smile on her face. She had achieved her goal of having the home to herself by removing Lily and me from the equation. It seemed to me then that there would be no use in disputing. Nothing I said would convince my folks otherwise. They had already made up their minds. I swallowed my rage, took Lily's hand, gathered our belongings, and left. However, I turned around and warned, "You'll regret this." As I was leaving, they didn't even bat an eyelid. My mother turned her head away. Mia grinned as if she had won a prize that evening, and my dad returned to watching TV. I held Lily close while she slept on the floor of a budget hotel room. Besides the fact that I was furious, I was also hurt. My parents were like this, the ones who were meant to care for and encourage me, and they had made the snap decision to pick Mia over me. However, I knew I couldn't let this destroy me as I gazed at Lily, who was so tiny and innocent. For her, I had to be strong. I wasn't only upset that we were ejected. The blatant contempt and arrogance they displayed infuriated me. I wasn't going to allow my folks get away with it since they had gone too far. They believed they could ignore my kid and me and still expect me to continue making mortgage payments on their home, not taking place. Years ago, when my parents refinanced the house, I called the bank first. Their credit was insufficient on its own, so I co-signed the loan. I believed I was assisting them at the time. I was unaware that when they conveniently omitted to submit payments, I would be left to pay the mortgage. I hadn't wanted to see them lose their house, so I had been covering for them for years. Now, however, I no longer felt that kind of loyalty. "I'm phoning to let you know." I informed the bank employee that I would no longer be paying loan payments. The agent was perplexed. "Ma'am, are you certain? Foreclosure might result from non-payment." I responded plainly, "That's fine. In any case, the house is not mine." Almost instantly, the burden was removed from my shoulders. I had been financially invested in that property for years, and my parents had treated me like a burden. They would now have to face the repercussions. I then gave a lawyer a call. I wanted to confirm that it was illegal for them to have thrown Lily and me out without warning. Since I wasn't on the lease, they couldn't legally remove me, but my rent payments did grant me certain rights as a renter. The attorney gave me the assurance that if I so desired, I could seek damages or file a complaint. It was reassuring to know that I had choices. After completing those 2 calls, I focused on locating a new residence. It wasn't simple. It was difficult to find reasonably priced apartments, and the majority of them either had lengthy wait lists or weren't in areas where I felt comfortable raising Lily. However, after looking for a few days, I discovered a modest one-bedroom apartment that was within my price range. We had it, even if it wasn't perfect. Nobody could expel us, and that was worth everything in and of itself. My parents started calling a week after I moved into the apartment. She sounded irritated at first. "How could you harm us like this?" She lost her temper. "Are you aware of the amount of stress you're causing, Mia? For heaven's sake, she is pregnant." I gave a sour laugh. "Feeling stressed? You're talking about the amount of anguish you caused Lily and me when you threw us out. It's funny that you didn't care about that." "On the defense," she added, "we didn't throw you out. All we needed was more room. In any case, you were going to depart eventually?" "Yes, Mother. Anything that aids in your nightly slumber." Then she changed her tone. By informing me how much problems they were in without my mortgage payments, she began guilt-tripping me. "Not everything is covered by your father's pension," she remarked. "We are currently delinquent on our bills. Is losing the house truly what you want?" "Yes," I stated plainly. "We were thrown away by you. After that, you have no right to ask for my assistance." My father wasn't much better. "You quote, being selfish," he said in his voicemail. "Your family is still here. Family members also look out for one another. Selfish. It hurt to hear that term. Given everything I had done for them over the years, I would jeopardize my financial security to ensure they had a place to live. They even had the audacity to accuse me of being selfish. Voicemail was deleted without a response. Then there was Mia. Oh, Mia. I hadn't seen anything yet if I had previously believed she was entitled. She began texting me nearly every day in a passive-aggressive manner. "I appreciate you making my pregnancy even more difficult. I hope you feel good about yourself. Do you no longer give a damn about this family? Or are you too preoccupied with being the victim?" She even brought up Lily once in an attempt to control me. "How are you modeling behavior for your daughter? Instructing her to leave family when things get difficult? Feel sophisticated?" All of her texts went unanswered by me. I wasn't going to give Mia the satisfaction of a reaction since she thrived on drama. However, every text simply strengthened my resolve to sever relations. Neither Lily nor I were important to these individuals. All that mattered to them was what I could do for them. The foreclosure notification reached my parents' home a few weeks later. My mother contacted me weeping uncontrollably, so I'm aware of this. The home will be taken by them. She let out a cry. "Take action." "Such as?" With real curiosity, I inquired. "It was you who wanted me gone. You're receiving what you desired now. You quote, not understanding." She cried. "Mia is now unable to cope with this level of stress. You are stronger than she is." I couldn't contain my laughter. "Oh, I've gained strength. Given that you have treated me like the second best person my whole life, it's amusing. Mom, figure it out. I'm finished." Lily and I were getting used to our new flat in the meanwhile. It was comfortable yet not ostentatious. For the first time in years, we spent our weekends touring the local parks and playgrounds, and I adorned her room with fairy lights and her favorite cartoon characters. I was liberated. No more being cautious with Mia. I'm done going out of my way to satisfy parents who didn't value me. Lily and I were alone, and that was more than sufficient. "I enjoy living here, Mother," Lily remarked as she gazed up at me one evening as I was putting her to bed. "It feels secure." I was moved to tears by what she said. Although it wasn't much, this small flat belonged to us. We couldn't let anyone take it away. And it was crucial. My folks were in full-blown panic mode by the end of the month. They tried to guilt-trip me and beg for my assistance in their nearly daily phone calls. Even via common acquaintances, Mia attempted to send messages accusing me of destroying the family, but I resisted. In my life, for the first time, I refused to be influenced by them. They were now coping with the repercussions of their decisions. And to be honest, it felt nice to defend myself at last. My parents were in complete breakdown mode by the time the foreclosure process began. It was hard to ignore the incessant calls, voicemails, and even messages from family members urging me to assist the family, even if I wasn't actively monitoring them. It seems that my parents had given a heavily manipulated account of what happened to everyone. They said that I had abandoned them during a trying time and refused to provide for my family, causing poor Mia to endure unnecessary stress while she was pregnant. Nothing about them throwing Lily and I out. Naturally, it was only me, the egotistical daughter, who stopped making mortgage payments. The calls became more imaginative. Emily, my mother, left progressively frantic voicemails. You were reared by us, and you pay us back like this? Your dad is inconsolable. Please keep Mia in mind. Any day now her baby's due. Furthermore, the stress is intolerable. Are you sure you want us to be homeless? What will Lily think of that when she gets older? The song was the same every time. Manipulation of emotions encased in a guilt trip. After a time, I stopped listening to the messages. My mother alternated between crying and ranting about how I was destroying the family and the few that I unintentionally replied. Then there was Mia. Oh, Mia. She did more than simply guilt trip me. She became more aggressive. She started making me the bad guy in her social media posts. I began receiving screenshots of these postings from friends we had in common. I've discovered that family isn't always there for you in times of need. Some folks are simply cold-hearted. Some individuals can be so vicious, it's unbelievable, particularly during a holy moment like pregnancy. I suppose that for some people, money is more important than family. I initially chose to dismiss it, but then I received a message from a buddy asking why Mia was claiming that you had left her homeless. I became aware of the extent of her willingness. Mia wasn't only attempting to blame me, she was resting flat out. I considered dealing with it, then I changed my mind. I wasn't going to waste energy defending myself to her social media henchmen, since the people who mattered understood the truth. Besides, she was going to face far more serious issues soon. A few weeks later came the formal foreclosure notice. My mother frantically phoned me right away. The house is being taken by them. How will we proceed? Her voice cracked as she sobbed. It sounds like a brand new issue, I answered calmly. Remember, I don't live there anymore. Please, sweetheart, she pleaded. There is nowhere for Mia to go. You are aware that the necessities are hardly covered by your father's pension. Everything will be lost for us. When you depend on someone and then stab them in the back, that's what occurs. I said, perhaps you will reconsider evicting the individual providing your housing the next time. Robert, my father, attempted something different. Later that day, he gave a call. Quieter but no less entitled was his tone. You don't want to see us homeless, do you? I realized that things became hot. Consider Lily. What would you think if she ever abandoned you? Funny, I remarked. You know, like when you threw Lily and I out, you turned your back on us? Perhaps she should learn to not put up with those who treat her like trash. Then he ended the call. Their flawless family facade began to reveal cracks as the foreclosure went on. Mia was furious. She was shocked that my parents had allowed things to go this bad, based on what I've heard from mutual acquaintances. As if they hadn't already gone out of their way to accommodate her, she accused them of failing to provide financial support. They need to have devised a strategy to retain the residents. According to reports, she told one pal, I'm expecting a child. What should I do at this point, Ben? Nor was her spouse overjoyed. Since they returned to the United States and now had a kid on the way, he had reportedly been paying the majority of their expenses. Mia's arrogant demeanor was starting to get on his nerves. Ben had had enough by the time their baby was born. I assumed that his reason for leaving her was irreconcilable disagreements. I'm sick of putting up with her bullshit. Naturally, Mia played the victim by sharing tearful selfies with captions that read "single mom." Without anyone's help, life may be quite difficult. Furthermore, some people are simply not suited for true commitment. My parents were forced to relocate to a modest apartment in a less attractive area of town in the interim. My dad's pension hardly paid their expenses, and my mom got a part-time work at a drugstore, something she hadn't done in decades. Their formerly cozy way of life had fallen apart, and they were now finally confronting the consequences of their decisions. In a way, I felt somewhat vindicated. They had been depending on me to ignore my financial contributions and treat me as if I were an afterthought for years. They were now dealing with the fallout from their entitlement, and it was obvious that they weren't managing it well. My mother called again, sobbing as she described how difficult things had become. She cried, "We can hardly afford groceries." In order to pay the rent last month, we had to sell the dining room set. Calmly, I answered, "I don't see how that's my problem. Your decisions were your own." Move in with them now. Mia made a last-ditch attempt to enlist me again. She blamed me for everything that had gone wrong in her life. In a lengthy text message, "My pregnancy was damaged by you. Made my parents oppose me. You are now only observing our suffering from a distance. I hope you're content with who you are." I took a good look at the words before erasing it. I owed myself nothing, not an apology, not an explanation, and most definitely not my assistance. Lily and I, meantime, were doing well. Our small flat had transformed into a peaceful, laughing haven. I finally moved to a nicer area while planning to obtain a better career. But I was happy for the moment. The last update. The consequences would eventually reach its lowest point. Ben, Mia's husband, had abandoned her, and my parents had lost the house. The home has vanished. All of their bridges appeared to be burned, and the debts were mounting. Lily and I, meantime, were doing better than ever. Although our tiny flat was unpretentious, it was secure, tranquil, and most of all, ours. About 2 months after the foreclosure was completed, my phone rang one evening. It was my mother. I was interested enough to respond because I hadn't heard from her in weeks. "Hi there," with caution I said. "My dear." Her voice trembled as she exclaimed, "We must speak. Would you please come over?" I scowled. "Come on over," where the home was lost. On Ridgeway Street, we're lodging in a modest flat. "Quickly," she said. "It's not much, but for the time being, it's home. Just come, please. You are necessary to us." I chose to go against my better judgment. A part of me wanted to know how far things had fallen apart for them. I was in disbelief when I got there. The little flat was filled with outdated, mismatched furnishings. My parents appeared worn out and discouraged, despite their lifelong pride in their once beautiful home. Mia and her infant sat in the corner, both of them looking just as wretched. My mother wrung her hands anxiously and whispered, "Thanks for coming." "What are you looking for?" I inquired, getting right to the point. Tears filled my mother's eyes. "We have erred. Now we are aware of that. But we need your assistance since we're having trouble. What specifically do you need help with?" I folded my arms and asked, "The expenses are mounting." My father spoke in a tone that was softer than I had ever heard. "We've had to sell practically everything of worth since we're late on our rent. Mia. Even though Mia is doing her hardest, she is now unable to accomplish it alone." At last, Mia raised her voice. Despite her pathetic look, her tone was keen. "We are in this situation because of you. We wouldn't be here if you hadn't ceased making mortgage payments." I laughed resentfully. "You mean if Lily and I hadn't been evicted from the house? This wouldn't have happened if I was paying for it. It's funny how that operates." Mia's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. My mother made an effort to make things better. Things weren't handled well by us. Now we can see that. However, we're not doing as well as you are. Please, for the sake of your family, can't you find it in your heart to assist us? I was both angry and incredulous as I looked at her. For the sake of family. The same family who had thoughtlessly thrown my kid and I out. I was treated like an afterthought by the same family that had treated me like a princess. "No," I answered firmly. "I am assisting you." My mother's face fell flat. "Please, sweetheart, we are in dire straits. When you tossed me in, I was too." "Lily out!" I yelled. "And you showed no concern. Remember how you told me to work things out? It's your time now then?" My father attempted to interrupt. "Now it's different. Mia has a baby and we are older. This cannot be done by us alone. I have no responsibility for Mia's child," I said icily. "Your bills aren't either. Your decisions were your own. Move in with them now." There was a brief silence in the room. I hoped they would finally get it. Then Mia spoke once again. "You are really self-centered, however," she began. But my mother interrupted her. "Mia." She lost her temper. We were both surprised. I had never saw my mother chastise her before. "This isn't assisting." Mia gave me a childish glare while huffing and crossing her arms. My mother grabbed my arm as I turned to go. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Wait. Just give it some thought, please. We don't have many demands. Just a little assistance till we are able to stand again." I shrugged off her hand. "When I was contributing to your home and paying your mortgage, you had all the assistance in the world. You tossed it aside. I'm not familiar with that at all." I ignored their objections and left the room. I would no longer allow them to control me. The calls decreased in frequency during the next 2 weeks. They were much more desperate when they did, though. My mother sobbed as she left voicemails about how difficult life was. "We've reached our lowest point," she remarked. "How much longer we can wait is beyond me." Mia, meantime, persisted in her outbursts on social media, portraying herself as the victim of callous familial treachery. Sometimes I got screenshots from friends, but I didn't mind. Allow her to act like the victim. I was aware of the reality. Anyone who mattered did too. Then one day the call completely ceased. Through a distant cousin, I learned that my parents had downsized and were selling what little they had left. According to reports, Mia had found herself at a shelter, her infant still holding on to the idea that she owed the world something. Lily and I, meantime, were doing well. Our tiny flat had transformed into a warm haven full with love and laughter. I was able to save money for the future since I had obtained a better career. On the weekends, Lily and I would spend peaceful nights at home, explore parks, or go to museums. As I watched her play and grin, I was reminded of the reasons for my decisions. I was determined to give her the steady, joyful life she deserved. "I enjoy being here, Mother," Lily remarked to me one evening as we watched her favorite movie on the couch. "It's ideal, and just the two of us." I was moved to tears by what she said. I had let the poisonous nature of my family to control my life for a very long time. I felt completely at ease for the first time in years now that I was free. Mia and my parents were now dealing with the fallout from the decisions they had made. For my part, I had at last discovered my strength. No matter how much they pleaded, I had no intention of returning. The future of my kid, my life, and my happiness were far more valuable than anything they could provide. And I understood it to be the last triumph. Story 3. In order to provide for my golden kid sibling, my parents increased my rent. They are now pleading with me to return after I departed. Hello everyone, I just wanted to let you know about something that's actually happening. Recently the channel has been a little slower, and to be honest, I worked really hard to uncover these tales so that I could continue to provide you with the greatest material. It would mean the world to me if you click the subscribe button if you like what I do. Your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. Hey everyone, my name is Alex and I'm 22. The OP begins. I don't typically share personal information online, but I felt compelled to share this. My family has been in disarray recently, and I'm at a loss on what to do. Perhaps hearing other viewpoints will help me make sense of things. So let's get started. I'm a software design student at the moment. I've had a long-standing enthusiasm for it, and one day I hope to launch my own business. In order to pay my own expenditures and save money for the future, I work part-time as a junior developer. I chose to live at home in order to save money on rent and transportation because my parents' house is near to my college. To be clear though, I'm not freeloading. Each month, I give my parents $550 to help with rent and other household bills. Since it's presumably what I would spend if I lived with roommates, I reasoned that it was reasonable. Why not instead assist my family? Living with my parents, things were going well or as well as they could be. Do not misunderstand me. They and I have always had a somewhat tangled connection. The fact that they have a favorite child is rather evident. Ryan, my elder brother, is the family's golden child. He's married, 23 years old, and has 2 children. He was usually the one getting into trouble as a child, skipping school, fighting, violating curfews, etc. It was Ryan, but my parents always supported him, regardless of what he did. In the meanwhile, I've made an effort to work hard, abide by the rules, and avoid difficulty. However, I never received the same amount of attention or assistance. After borrowing funds from my parents and his in-laws to launch a company, Ryan moved out with his wife and children almost a year ago. He even purchased a home, claiming it was a huge development opportunity. Despite my skepticism, I reasoned that perhaps he is sincere about accepting responsibility this time. In the present, he has returned, much to everyone's amazement. He arrived at my parents' house with his whole family and said he just needed to remain till he received a huge payoff from his business. He's talking about millions of dollars and saying that once he has the funds, he would purchase our family a home in a wealthy area. My folks are taking it at face value. On to his every word. This is the issue. I still have to pay my $550 a month, even if Ryan and his family live here for free. And you know how much Ryan pays? Yes, nothing, not at all, nothing. The fact that he isn't making any contributions seems to bother my parents. They seem oblivious to the reality that he has spent his whole life stealing from everyone around him. In the meantime, there is now total anarchy in the house. Despite their cuteness, Ryan's 2 toddlers are inherently noisy and untidy. It's tough to find any quiet since their toys have taken over the living room. I've attempted to set up my office in my room, but it's still unsafe. Ryan doesn't even try to stop the youngsters from regularly breaking in. He dismisses it with a simple laugh. It's not much better with his wife. From the clothes heaped in the hallway to the soiled dishes in the sink, she leaves their trash everywhere. The fact that Ryan and his spouse behave as like they own the establishment is what truly irritates me. The kitchen is totally overrun with them. Additionally, I receive ice rolls and passive-aggressive remarks about how family shares everything if I even want to take a turn cooking. Yes, however, it seems that they do not split the cost of anything. My parents dismissed my attempts to discuss it with them. My mother advised me to realize that Ryan is going through a difficult period and that family supports family. She became upset and warned me not to bring it up again when I inquired whether Ryan was going to start helping out with food or rent. I feel like a stranger in my own house now. Even though I put a lot of effort into saving money and making plans for the future, it seems like my parents don't care. Ryan and his business are everything that matters to them. That could or might not be real. They act as like they are in a fantasy world where Ryan is a self-made millionaire, and I am only there to pay the bills while they wait for him to get paid. I considered moving out, but the prospect makes me anxious. Since I don't make a lot of money, rent is high. Even though my part-time work pays well, I don't have much money left over after paying my tuition and saving for the future. Moving out would also seem to me like conceding defeat. Why should my life have to be uprooted because Ryan won't accept accountability? It's unfair. I suppose I'm attempting to determine if I'm at fault in this situation. In order to maintain peace, should I accept it and pay more? Or am I correct in thinking that this is utterly unjust? Although I've always tended to shy away from confrontation, this circumstance is really getting to me. I quote, am sick of having to make concessions all the time while Ryan gets away with it. That's my present predicament then. I'm torn between wanting to defend myself and not wanting to exacerbate my family's situation. If anyone has had a similar circumstance, I would be interested in knowing how they managed it. I'll keep everyone informed on the following steps. I appreciate you reading. One point should be updated. Hey, it's Alex again. I've been trying to figure out how to deal with all of this turmoil with my family, as I said in the first article. Even while things were already stressful, they have gotten worse recently. To be honest, I have no idea where to start. My mother entered my room last week and pretended to be checking up on me, but I could sense something wasn't right. She inquired about how work was doing at first, then abruptly changed the subject. Something like, "You know, Alex," she said, "the cost of living has increased significantly since Ryan and his family moved in with us." I didn't say anything yet, but I could sense where this was going. She then struck me with it. "To help cover everything, we'll need you to contribute a little extra." What I was hearing was unbelievable. I mean, for years I have been paying my share more than my part. I have never once grumbled about my contributions or demanded a favor. In the meantime, Ryan and his spouse have essentially taken over the house and are not paying for anything. I then asked her directly, "How about Ryan?" In response to my mother's response, "Will he begin to pay rent?" She became irritated and mumbled something evasive about how family supports family, and that Ryan is now going through a difficult time. Then, as if the conversation had ended, she just left my room. I was furious. Right now, it's not even about the money, it's the idea behind it. Why does Ryan get away with it while I have to step up and support the family? My dad supported her during breakfast the next day. In passing, he said that because we're all in this together, I need to think about doing more. Before I could even continue, he interrupted me as I was trying to make my point. He simply stood up, said, "Consider it," and left. I turned to look at Ryan in the hopes of receiving encouragement or recognition, but he simply stared at me and continued to eat as if nothing had happened. When I arrived home from work later that evening, I made the decision that I had to face my mother once again. I informed her that I already couldn't afford to pay extra, between paying my education and putting money down for the future. She didn't care that I was already overburdened. She went on to say that Ryan had children to look after and that I had to make sacrifices for the family. For example, I understand that he has children, but he is also an adult. Why am I now expected to provide for his family? My parents have been ignoring me ever since that time. They hardly ever communicate with me, and when they do, it's always to make passive-aggressive remarks about how I'm not working well with others. Naturally, Ryan hasn't mentioned anything at all. He basically lets me bear the brunt of the criticism while he keeps getting away with it. Not much has changed with his marriage. She began saying things like, "I wish we had the luxury of focusing on ourselves like you do," and "It must be nice to have so much money saved up." When she originally stated that, I nearly burst out laughing because really, what luxury? To save as much money as possible, I've been working really hard. In contrast, she and Ryan make no contributions at all. The fact that my parents don't seem to give a damn about anything I've been doing hurts me the most. I've been paying my bills, working hard, and avoiding difficulty. However, they don't appear to care about any of it. They go above and above to help Ryan, who makes mistakes all the time. I feel like I'll never be able to compare to him in their eyes, no matter what I do. A few days ago, things reached a breaking point. My mother entered my room without knocking when I was sitting there attempting to do some studying. "We're going to set this up in here for the kids," she added, dropping a toddler bed in the corner of my room. "They require additional room." I was taken aback. I informed her she wasn't supposed to go to my room. "This is my room," I said, attempting to make it into a narrative. "You cannot just decide to take control." "Don't be dramatic, Alex," she murmured, rolling her eyes. "It's not really important." However, she ultimately stormed off after I refused to back down, mumbling something about how self-centered I was. Things became much more heated the next day. Ryan's wife was searching through my desk drawers when I got home from work. She simply smiled and replied, "Oh, I was looking for a pen," when I asked her what she was doing. "A pen?" She chose to enter my personal space even though the kitchen had a whole drawer full of pens. It seemed very rude. However, Ryan simply shrugged and said she didn't mean anything when I brought it up to him. Despite my best efforts to ignore it, I heard Ryan speaking to my parents later that evening. "I need to be more supportive," he said, "and it's time for Alex to take charge and assist the family." My blood was boiling. In addition to freeloading, he was now attempting to use guilt to get me to give him even more of my money and personal space. I recognized then that I was no longer able to accomplish this. I've always tried to be the nice kid, in the hopes that my parents will eventually see my value, if I put in enough effort. However, I eventually came to terms with the fact that it would never occur. No matter how much I accomplish or how much Ryan fails, they will always pick him. That evening, I began looking for flats. The choice wasn't simple. I don't have a lot of money, and I'm aware that my family will be much more tense if I move out. However, I can't continue to live this way. Being treated like a second-class citizen in my own house is something I'm sick of. It's okay if my folks want to elevate Ryan. However, they will have to accomplish it without my assistance. That's where I am at the moment then. I've officially given up attempting to win over those who don't value me. I've begun gradually collecting my belongings, but I haven't notified my family yet. At this moment, I don't really care. But I'm not sure how they'll react when they find out. All I want is to go and begin living on my own. I appreciate everyone listening. I'll let you know what occurs next shortly. Good luck to me. Version 2.0. Hey, it's Alex once more. Since my previous post, things have become fairly stressful, but I'm now beginning to see the bright side. I quote made up my mind in light of all that has transpired with Ryan and my parents. I'm leaving. Staying here feels impossible right now. But it won't be simple. So allow me to explain how I want to accomplish this without seriously damaging my connection with my family, at least not immediately. First things first. I began searching for flats. Let me tell you, it's more difficult than I anticipated to locate a home that's not a complete dump, reasonable, and close enough to job and school. The majority of the locations I could find were either completely beyond my means or in dubious areas. I knew I couldn't stay at my parents' place for very long without going crazy, but I also didn't want to jump into anything. The strain was increasing daily. My mother continued hinting that we all need to make sacrifices because things are tight right now. Naturally, Ryan was totally unaware. I was just trying to keep out of the way as he and his wife worked on transforming the house into their own playground. Finally, I got help from a friend of a friend. One of their acquaintances, Jake, was seeking a roommate. Jake wanted someone to divide the rent and expenses for the little 2-bedroom apartment he had recently rented. At first, I was dubious. It's not exactly ideal to live with a stranger after all. However, after seeing the flat and meeting Jake, I began to think that this may work. It was a simple home with a little kitchen and a communal bathroom, nothing special. However, it was reasonably priced, clean, and just a 20-minute walk from school. The nicest aspect was that I wouldn't have to deal with any unexpected visitors because it was far enough from my parents' place. Jake decided to let me move in after we discussed it. We agreed to divide everything 50-50, so my portion of the rent would be less than what I've been giving my parents each month, roughly $400, even after food and expenses are included. Compared to what I'm going through right now, I would still be saving money. The decision seemed obvious. Finding a way out without making a big scene was the difficult part. I was aware that my parents would stop at nothing to prevent me from moving out if I informed them I was preparing to do so. Probably going into full guilt trip mode, my mom would talk about how I was leaving the family and how they needed my assistance. My father would simply become irate and accuse me of lacking gratitude. Ryan too. He would probably think I was bluffing and laugh it off. I thus choose to keep it a secret. Over the course of the following 2 weeks, I gradually began packing my belongings. I kept the most of it hidden in storage bins in the back of my closet when no one was home so as not to cause any suspicions. After smuggling a few items into my car, I would drive them to Jake's house. I knew that was the only way to prevent a full-blown family breakdown, even if it was a gradual process. I began to retreat more and more from my family at this period. I no longer joined them for supper, preferring to have short meals in my room. I concentrated on getting through each day without losing my anger and shunned any discussions about money or family obligations. It wasn't simple. I wanted to shout every time my mom said anything passive-aggressive like, "Everyone needs to pitch in," or "Ryan's wife left a mess in the kitchen for me to clean up." But I kept telling myself that this situation wouldn't last for long. I kept going because I had a deadline in sight. Maintaining my composure with the children was one of the most difficult aspects. I love my niece and nephew, as I've mentioned, but recently they've been making me crazy. On certain days, they've taken over the kitchen, the living room, and even my room. I can't even count the number of times I've returned home from class or work to discover toys all over the place. Crayon markings on my walls or sticky handprints on my desk. Setting limits was like talking to a brick wall, despite my best efforts. His wife pretended that I was being irrational, and Ryan simply laughed it off. "Alex, they're only children," she would say, as if that will solve all the problems. I was, in the meantime, counting down the days until I could once more have my own place. A few days ago, I heard Ryan and my mother discussing my funds, which was the last straw. For years, I've been working really hard to accumulate money for my goal of launching a software business. It's mine, but it's not much yet. Additionally, I'm rather proud of the discipline with which I've adhered to my spending plan. You can only imagine how shocked I was to hear Ryan advise my mother that I ought to contribute a portion of my funds to support the family. "Alex doesn't need all that money right now," he remarked. "Later, he can launch his business. Family comes first." "Do you mean me?" I was astounded by the boldness. Later, when I challenged him about it, he pretended that I was the one who was selfish for refusing to part with my hard-earned cash. "Alex, we're all having a hard time right now." I mean, his predicament was even somewhat similar to mine. I bluntly told him that he had to start providing for his own family and that my savings were no longer available. He simply rolled his eyes and turned to go. For me, it was it. Returning to my room, I picked up a box and began packing my final belongings. I was finished. I no longer cared what Ryan or my folks thought. I was aware that I was worthy of better. Everything is now in order. I've prepared to move out this weekend, signed the lease, and packed my belongings. I have yet to inform my parents. After I'm gone, I think it's best to tear off the Band-Aid. I'm not going to stay for the repercussions, but I will leave a message or something explaining why I made the choice. They can handle Ryan's freeloading behavior on their own. Sincerely, I don't care anymore, even though I know this will lead to a lot of turmoil. I have to stay in that house and do what's best for me, don't I? I'm prepared to start again somewhere where I can genuinely concentrate on my objectives without being hindered by confusion and worry. Good luck to me, everyone. In the upcoming update, I'll inform you on the situation. 3 points should be updated. Hello everyone, this is Alex once more. I'd done it at last. I left home. Although it wasn't always easy, I feel as like a huge burden has been removed off my shoulders. The entire journey has been a roller coaster of feelings, including relief, anxiety, and excitement. But I have no regrets. This is how it all transpired. I thus scheduled my relocation for the weekend, when I knew Ryan's family and my parents would not be home. I thought that because they were attending a cookout with some family friends, it would be ideal to finish things amicably. Packing the rest of my belongings and making sure everything was set to travel took up the whole week before when Saturday finally arrived. I had everything I needed in my car and was prepared to go. After all the drama and mayhem, I must say that it felt strange to go through the house one last time. I was still growing up there. For a minute, I just stood in my room, absorbing everything. It had been my place for years, although it wasn't fancy. I kept reminding myself why I was doing this, even though it seemed sad to be leaving it behind. When I arrived at my new location, I had to prioritize myself for once. Jake was there to assist me with unloading already. I can't express how wonderful it was to see my belongings in a completely other location. One that was all mine. It's a modest 2-bedroom apartment with a common kitchen and living area. Nothing special. However, it's peaceful, tidy, and above all, dramatic. I arranged my desk bed and a few personal items in my room, and I was able to breathe for the first time in years. It was a surreal first night at my new residence. It wasn't until I was in total silence that I realized how much stress and noise I had been putting up with. No children frolicking about, don't argue over money. Nobody has ever walked into my room without knocking first. For the first time in weeks, I sat down at my desk, turned on my laptop, and actually accomplished some work. It was a wonderful feeling. Naturally, the tranquility was short-lived. My phone was exploding by Sunday night. When my mother finally realized I wasn't home, she began calling constantly. After ignoring the initial calls, I realized I had to answer. She began yelling before I had a chance to say hello when I picked up the phone. "Where are you, Alex? How come you're not at home? All day he has been phoning you." I said, "I don't live there anymore," maintaining my composure. "I'm no longer living there." On the other end, you could have heard a pin drop. Then she blew up. "Are you saying that you've moved out? How come you didn't inform us? How could you harm your family in this way?" She went on and on about how they had been depending on me to assist with expenditures and how I was leaving them. I tried to emphasize that Ryan had made no contribution, and I had been paying more than my fair amount for years. She dismissed it entirely. "Alex, Ryan has children. You have no idea what parenthood is like." I realized then that there was no use in arguing with her. "I've done everything I can to assist Mom, but I can't continue to live that way," I replied. "You have the option to back Ryan if you so want. However, I will no longer continue to give up my life for it." I hung up after that. I was too tired to argue more. The texts began the next day. My mother wrote me a lengthy text about my selfishness and lack of gratitude, and then another about how I was destroying the family. My father also said that he was disappointed with me and that I needed to mature and see the value of family. Ryan even texted me to say, "Wow, you screwed up your parents when they needed you the most." Very mature. None of it got a response from me. They wouldn't alter their views, and to be honest, I was too tired to give a damn. For the first time in years, I spent the day shopping groceries, arranging my room, and getting settled in my new apartment. I had the impression that I was in charge of my life. My mother gave me another call a few days later. She wasn't shouting this time. Instead of being furious, she sounded desperate. She began discussing how difficult life had been since I left, how they were having trouble making ends meet, and how Ryan's children were disappointed that I was no longer around. We quote V always stood by you, Alex, she even said, in an attempt to guilt trip me. Is this your way of paying us back? I inhaled deeply before saying, Mom, I love you, but I've been taking care of myself for years. I've been working, saving for the future, and paying my rent. Ryan, however, hasn't made any contributions. I can't continue to put my life on wait in order to tidy up his mess. It quotes unfair. It wasn't warmly received by her. She broke down in tears as she expressed her uncertainty about how they would cope without me. Even though it was difficult to hear, I refused to back down. I informed her that they needed to work things out with Ryan and that I would not be returning. She hung up after that, and I haven't heard from her since. But Ryan hasn't given up on getting in touch with me. He keeps messaging me, begging for money, and accusing me of being self-centered for not lending a hand. He even added, "You've always been the responsible one," at one point. How come you can't just take charge and support your family? After reading it, I nearly burst out laughing. This guy's nerves. In spite of all the turmoil, I think I made the proper choice. It's quiet where I'm now. My roommate is cool, and I can now concentrate on my job and studies without being interrupted all the time. Although I know it was essential, severing connections with my family hasn't been easy. I can't continue to give up my future and pleasure for unappreciative individuals. That quote S where I am at the moment then. For the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful, even though I have no idea what the future contains. I appreciate all of the people who have been reading my story and giving me guidance. You don't realize how much it has helped. To let you all know how things work out, I'll probably publish one last update shortly. The last update. Hello everyone, this is Alex once more. This is likely to be my final update. I moved out a few weeks ago, and to be honest, I feel like a totally different person now. Although the consequences of my choice haven't been pleasant, they have also let me see my family and myself more clearly when I'm not subject to their unceasing criticism. Let quote S now discuss how things have changed since my departure. First of all, since my mom's first outburst when I told her I was moving out, her response hasn't really altered. She went into overdrive with her guilt trip. The text, which was full of dramatic words like, "How could you leave us in this situation?" continued rolling in every day. "And your family is important to you?" She even went so far as to say, "Alex, this is how you repay us for all that we sacrificed for you." Reading those texts without experiencing a twinge of shame was difficult. I do love my parents after all. I'll always be appreciative of all that they did for me as a child. However, they appear to be unaware that being grateful and in love does not entail allowing oneself to be used. Ryan hasn't done anything to help, so I've been the one keeping things going for years. My portion has been paid. I ignored my own wants and cleaned up their mess. Again and again. Enough is enough. I had hoped my dad would be more realistic, but he's just as awful. A few days after I moved out, he called, and the talk was, to put it mildly, draining. Calm at first. He asked me why I felt the need to go without first speaking with them. I tried my best to express my frustration at being treated like a second-class family member. I informed him that I had been contributing financially for years by paying my rent, and that it was unfair for them to expect me to do so much more while Ryan was given a pass. His answer: "You must realize that Ryan is in a difficult situation, Alex. It's your responsibility as his brother to help him while he tries to get his life together. Families remain united." It seemed unbelievable to me. "Dad, you and Mom never hold Ryan accountable for anything, so he's been in a tough spot his entire life," I remarked. "I've finished tidying up his mess. You have the option to continue allowing him. However, I will no longer participate in it." That was not warmly received. He accused me of being self-centered, of leaving the family, and even of ignoring Ryan's children. I do care for my niece and nephew, so that one stung the most. They are only children. And they're not to blame for any of this. However, I shouldn't have to give up my future for them, especially if their own parents aren't willing to help. In relation to Ryan, he has also been using my phone excessively. His words are a combination of direct demands and guilt tripping. He says, "It's unbelievable that you would abandon Mom and Dad in this way." Then he's requesting funds to help him get back on his feet. He even sent me a lengthy message at one point, saying that I've always been the one in charge, and that it's my responsibility to support him, since that's what family does. To be honest, I didn't answer any of it. What's the point? I won't be the one to save Ryan again since he has avoided responsibilities all of his life. Great if he wants to change his life. However, he will have to accomplish everything on his own without my assistance. Conversely, my new flat has been a wonderful place to live. Yes, it's little, but it's nice and quiet, and I feel like I've got some breathing room at last. My roommate Jake has been really laid back. We divided the food and expenses equally. Furthermore, there are no absurd demands, drama, or guilt trips. For the first time in what seems like an eternity, I've been able to concentrate on my job and studies. Last week, I even completed a significant assignment for my software design class, which I doubt I could have completed if I had been living at home. The finest aspect, I'm beginning to feel like myself once more. I was trapped in a never-ending loop of attempting to convince my parents of my value in the hopes that they would eventually see me as Ryan's equal if I put in enough effort or made enough contributions. However, I now understand it will never occur, and that's all right. Their partiality speaks louder for them than for me. I can pursue my goals and live my life without their approbation. I quote, "We've been discussing things with a few close pals, and their encouragement has been invaluable. They've shown me that having limits isn't a sign of selfishness, it's essential. A person does not have the right to take advantage of you just because they are your kin. It's a difficult lesson to learn, but I'm happy I did. I've made the decision to keep my distance from Ryan and my parents for the time being. I still sometimes check in with my mom to let her know how I'm doing, but I avoid talking about money or Ryan and make our talks brief. Although it's not ideal, I have to do it to keep my sanity intact. Perhaps things will improve in the future, but I'm concentrating on myself for the time being. What will I do next? I will continue to save money toward my goal of launching a software business. I've no idea how long it will take or what obstacles I may encounter, but I feel hopeful for the first time in a long time. I am confident that I possess the abilities and willpower to succeed, and I feel like anything is possible when I'm not burdened by my family's continual tension. To everyone who has read my tale and given me guidance, thank you. Seeing that I'm not the only one suffering with toxic family dynamics has been made possible by your support, which has meant the world to me. Please know that it's acceptable to defend yourself if you find yourself in a similar circumstance. Respect is something you deserve, and sometimes leaving is the wisest course of action. Alex is going to sign off now. Cheers to fresh starts.